Uh, okay.
Svetlana, we are live. Videos.
Yes, I'm trying to. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Svetlana Malish, and I am a moderator for today's webinar. The title of the webinar is Impact of Prices and Supply Chain in the Black Sea region and the grain markets. Thank you again for joining us. Before I introduce the speakers, there are a few housekeeping points I'd like to cover before. At the bottom of the webinar screen, you should see a toolbar. Use this toolbar to access a range of applications such as technical support, webinar materials, speakers' biographies, and so on. Please submit your questions throughout the webinar via the Q&A box, and we will try to answer these questions towards the end of the webinar. For the best viewing experience, we recommend closing any programs or browser sessions running in the background. This will help conserve your bandwidth. The webcast is being streamed through your computer, so the best audio quality, please make sure your computer speakers or headset volume is turned up. We should like you to be involved in our event as much as possible in our current tough times. So we have prepared some questions and kindly ask you to answer them during the webinar. We think it will be very interesting for you to share your opinion with other attendees, with other people, and to know what the view of other people are. We value your feedback, so please do complete the pop-up survey at the end of the webinar. It will help us to improve our work. So without ado, let me introduce the speakers. The first speaker will be myself. I will try to cover information on price trends in the Black Sea region during the last couple of months. There are difficult months both for markets and for people. Then we have a discussion with our honored guests. These are Nikolai Gorbachev, President of Ukrainian Grain Association. Also, he is a General Director at Soufflé Agro, Ukraine. And Oleg Kryukovsky, Head of Trading Department, GTSC Trading Company. Oleg represents the biggest grain exporter of Russia, from Russia. So the last part, the last presenter will be my colleague Aaron Grau. He is a senior analyst covering crop production estimates for Black Sea region, especially Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and also Aaron covers some European countries. So let's start with a little outlook. COVID-19 and Black Sea grain market trends. Let's start my part of presentation. And first of all, I should state that new COVID-19 virus outbreak and lockdown followed after all over the world have become an extremely tough experience, both for people and for markets. Being still locked in our homes, we are still doing our jobs, duties, and we continue working. And we have shifted most of our everyday activities online, and it's true. COVID-19 and lockdown have broken the familiar to us life patterns, but brought new ones. And the same is true actually both for prices and for demand side. Because consumers' demand had been changed drastically, and so has the prices. Global recession is more and more predictable and more visible around us, and economic development is slowing. It's obviously. So let's look who was the first victim of COVID-19 outbreak in the Black Sea region. Initially, Eastern Asian population had been locked down in the beginning of 2020. And cooking oils had been the first which suffered from COVID-19. And crude sunflower oil had definitely been among them. In addition, oil, being a background indicator for commodities, has plummeted to historical lows. And this tracked sunflower oil prices down too. Refinitiv monitoring showed prices for Ukrainian sunflower oil slid to a one-year low in mid-March. You can see this on the graph, on the chart. In mid-March, but then restored to a two-month high in mid-April due to strong demand, especially for Turkey. When it comes to wheat, we've observed the similar pattern. Changes in consumers' demand had been promoted prices trends. In case of Black Sea region, consumers' concerns of export restrictions and insufficient supply has driven wheat prices to a one-year high at this point. And Black Sea wheat prices have remained frozen at this level, and you will see it. As an exhausted export quota leaves Russian wheat market illiquid, at mostly liquid. And Ukrainian wheat exports have nearly reached its great figures for the current season, because as you can know, Ukraine government authorities and Ukrainian traders and grain market participants agree every year how much wheat they could export every season. Actually, we will discuss the issue of export restrictions and food supply chain sustainability a little later during our panel with our invited speakers, Mr. Oleg Kryukovsky and Nikolai Gorbachev. So let's move to corn. When we draw attention to corn market, we can see that despite a strong connection between corn and oil markets, prices for Ukrainian corn have remained rather stable. This orange line on the right chart. Prices for Ukrainian corn has remained rather stable, supported by strong foreign demand during February-April period. But when cheap Argentinian wheat had entered the global market, Ukrainian corn became the most expensive commodity in the world and hasn't attracted buyers' attention any longer. There is another economic factor worth being mentioning, and if we describe the Black Sea grain market. This is our local currencies rate. This is visible on the right chart. COVID-19 and global slowdown have forced the currencies of developing countries, including Black Sea countries, which are Russia and Ukraine, to decline significantly. And so we've observed both Russian ruble and Ukrainian hryvnia. On the other hand, it was supportive for domestic prices and helped exporters to secure grain supply. On the other hand, it made the factor of lowering global food prices less harmful for local Black Sea producers. As you can see from the chart on the left, domestic grain prices in the Black Sea countries have been either stable, for example, like in case for Ukrainian, or rising constantly in case of Russia. In conclusion, let's have a look at how export shipments had proceeded during the lockdown. And we choose the period from February to April, to May, up to May. It's not a secret that many people in Russia and Ukraine have been working remotely, but they work hard to secure supply chain sustainable. Using the data on export shipments available in ICON, we can state that the Black Sea countries increased wheat shipments by 50% during Feb-April period compared to the same period last year. Corn shipments from Ukraine has been gradually slowing, but during this period, they remain stable at the rate of 3.6 million tons per month. And don't forget that this year, Ukraine gathered another record corn crop, and so the export shipments, corn shipments, were rather stable and exceeded the last year period. Okay, so let's move to a discussion panel, Black Sea countries' protection measures to cope with COVID-19 impact and secure their sustainable food supply. And I kindly ask to join our discussion Oleg Kryukovsky and Nikolai Gorbachev. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm glad to see you, even it's virtual possibility to greet you. Let's start our discussion. Officially, COVID-19 reached Black Sea region a bit later than other countries, and we've observed BSP in order to cover local consumers' needs. Which destination were the most active in purchases during this period? Oleg, could we start the discussion with your opinion, with your view, please?
Good day, everyone. Happy to see you all and to pretend to be outside without a mask. That's an incredible feeling, you know, when you don't wear something on your face. So to start with, actually, the current season 1920 was full of challenges and surprises for market participants. It started the season in July, and the huge surprise for all the Russian players was incredible amount of high quality Russia, which nobody knew where to place it, where to sell it. At the same time, farmers, they were not willing to sell anything. It was a disaster in the beginning of the season. Exports in the main months, like July, August, September, were at record lows. But nevertheless, situation somehow leveled off. Market participants found a way how to cope with each other, how to work. Then we came to the new year, 2020. The leap year, as usually, brings surprises. This year, this leap year surprise was COVID-19. For Russia, actually, and for whole Black Sea area and for the whole world, the news from China, this faraway remote country, about unknown virus and unknown disease, was like a fairy tales, insignificant. Nobody paid much attention on this, at least from January till probably March. Biggest concern for the market, for Russia, I would say, was the collapse of oil prices and the devaluation of ruble, which happened in the early March. And that caused a huge shock to the market. A huge number of offers came out of Russia because the devaluation was tremendous. Following this, let's say, March devaluation of Russian currency, the world globally began to slowly but surely plunge into the, let's call it, COVID nightmare. And we are still in this COVID nightmare. So coming back to the question, like, how was the demand? Have we seen any panic buying, any extra new tenders, any buyers were looking for emergency covers of their needs? I would say no. Market in general was working normally, if we may say that in such circumstances market can work normally. But there was no any spike of demands. Regular customers continued to buy as usual. Normally, we've seen tenders to Egypt and Turkey, to Saudi Arabia, but those tenders happened same time a year ago, so everything was pretty normal. And in short, I can say that more market fluctuations were caused by Twitter's and Facebook messages than by the COVID pandemic in terms of demand.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much. It's really interesting, and it's absolutely impressive to see that in this big rush, Black Sea countries were absolutely reliable partners, and they proceed normally. Okay, could we ask Nikolai to join our discussion and comment on situation with demand for Ukrainian grains during this period, please? Any troubles?
Houston.
Something went bad with Nikolai's connection. Yes, Nikolai told me that he can hear us, but actually we can't hear him. Yes, we can't hear him. Yeah, I'm so sorry about that. Okay, actually, I know that during this period, February, April, the demand for Ukrainian wheat was supported by the fact that sometimes prices for Russian wheat were rather high. And as this season, Ukraine has gathered not only an abundant wheat crop, it was a record crop really, but this crop was an excellent quality. And sometimes Ukrainians and Russian region were competitive to each other. And during this period, we've, as an analysts, observed a spike in demand and a spike in prices, especially for Ukrainian 12.5 protein wheat. If we speak about corn, in this case, prices for Ukrainian corn were highly supported by traditional and long-expected demand from China, because actually it's obviously and widely known that Ukrainian corn is one of the regions which could be delivered to the Chinese market. Okay, let's move please to the measures. Let's discuss the measures, protection measures, which Black Sea countries had taken to secure their own food supply. And this is the question of export quotas. And in this case, I speak not only about Russia, with its export quota, I speak not only about Ukraine with its attempt to limit corn exports. We saw that Romania would like to limit their exports as well. And actually, we saw the example of Turkey, who was very worried about their lemons export. Do we have a connection with Nikolai? No? Nikolai? Okay. In this situation, it is understandable that Russian government preferred to limit grain exports and hasn't used the possibility to apply export tax so far. Oleg, could you comment on advantages and disadvantages on corn taxes based on your previous trading experience? Because this method, this approach, had already been used by Russia some seasons ago. And what are your thoughts about these protection measures?
Well, yeah, indeed. The idea of regulating, controlling, or managing somehow the flow of strategic important goods such as wheat is always present in many states. And Russia, fortunately, is not alone in this matter. But as it sometimes happens, we have our own way how to see the process, how to implement those taxes. In general, let's say the idea of implementing the export tax should to provide help for the industries which are affected by the rise of prices in the local market, so that this help could ease domestic consumers of flour, of bread, not to feel any increase of the prices. But reality, which we have seen in previous seasons, it's a little bit different. So the farmers, the producers are deprived of the opportunity to get additional money because of the increased demand. And exporters simply decrease the purchasing prices on the level of this tax. And limitation hit the producer in the first place. Also, another serious and tremendous disadvantage of the export duties is that they are of a sudden nature. So if it's implemented within 10 days or within a month, there are not majority, but a big number of exporters who could have contracts concluded way before this export tax was implemented, and it was not foreseeable. But payment of those duties are on the shoulders of the exporters. So it's losses, sometimes not huge losses, sometimes huge losses for any company, any market participants. So there are no any advantages of the export taxes for any participant on the market so far.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much. It's very interesting. And actually, you know that Ukraine has been introducing an export quotas for wheat, in particular, for the last several seasons. And actually, I know that Nikolai has been doing a great work. He organized within the Ukrainian Grain Association a lot of kinds of market participants, like millers, producers, farmers, traders, and even governmental authorities. And together they work on supply and demand balance, and they check this balance every month, understanding and trying to check if everything goes well. And I know that recently Russian authorities has expressed the idea to use this support and protection tool, like export quotas. Do you like the idea to know how much grain can be shipped abroad from the very beginning of the season to the last day of the season? You as a trader.
Well, look, frankly speaking, I don't like any assistance which are limiting or regulating the free market. But if you choose between two evils, duty or quota for sure is a great alternative. Of course, there is a technical question of huge importance. How are actual exports being calculated? But this is technical details. But in general, if you talk about a quota which tells you that, let's say, from July till December or January, you can export certain amount of cargo, it gives you some, let's say, planning possibility and ideas how to plan your logistics and trade. So in this sense, it's a good idea. But how will it work in reality? Only time will tell.
Yes, it's a pity that we can't hear Nikolai, and I'm sure he will be able to share his experience in coordinating work in this respect. But anyway, I think this is a good pile of work to do. So as we've devoted so much attention to the question of possible restrictions and these restriction tools, I would like to involve our audience, our attendees, to our discussion. So, our dear guests, you see a question on your screen. Do you expect any restrictions in the countries of the Black Sea region in the next season? And we can kindly ask you to choose one of the answers stated on the screen, and in 10 or 20 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, if someone has to think a little bit more, we will know your opinion about the possibility of export restrictions from the Black Sea grain countries in the next season. Please start answering, and we will count in up to 20.
Loud or by heart?
8, 9, 10. No. Don't be interfere, people thinking about possible restrictions. Okay, hope everyone who wanted to submit their questions has already done it. So 70% of our attendees believes or predict that potentially we will have some export restrictions in the Black Sea countries next season. So let's think about export quota for Russian grains. Okay, let's move on. Consumers in many countries were frightened that lockdown in export countries made food supply chain disrupted. Even FAO called on the exporters countries to support deliveries smooth. Oleg, can you comment on situation with Russia logistics? What is your view on port logistics and inland deliveries in lockdown Russia?
Yeah, indeed, in the first, let's say, weeks of this so-called lockdown, there were fears and speculations that there are going to be huge delays, enormous quarantine measures in Russian ports inside of Russia, etc., etc. There was, if I'm not mistaken, even official documents saying that vessels coming from certain countries, if I'm not mistaken, it was North Korea, Italy, Iran, and China probably. They should stay 14 days alongside anchorage, waiting for the free practice. But in reality, I have not heard of any cases of such a huge delays. We have not faced personally any delays in river ports, any delays in seaports in terms of free practice. So vessels were coming and berthing with the lineup and loading normally. There were some limitations initially on local transport inside of Russia because some regions were implementing measures that to go out from one region to another region, the drivers or the companies owning the trucks should receive some kind of permit. That slowed down a little bit the transport, but it did not have any, let's say, huge impact on the market. Cargo continued to come and coming constantly to the ports. At what levels, at what pace it levels, I mean, the prices, it's another story, but in general, there are no restrictions to move the cargo. Similar to cargo movements, there were some expectations that official authorities issuing certain certificates will be working with delays. But fortunately, situation within first weeks of quarantine or non-working days, how it was called in Russia, settled, and there were no any kind of enormous delays. It was 2-3 days delay to get some certain documents for the vessel or for the wagon, but there were no delays as it should have been expected, like weeks due to this quarantine. So technically, everything was working normally.
Actually, I could add the same words. I could state the same about Ukraine, because port logistics was very well, and I heard a lot of information. I heard a lot of nice responses from the market participants that during the lockdown, when rail deliveries of rail transshipments of people were banned, grain deliveries were absolutely perfect. And one trader told me that, for example, as earlier, rail cars should be on their way, for example, for 10-15 days towards the ports. But during this period, in May, in April, grain was reached the ports in 1 or 2 days. It was amazing. So you can see that wheat shipments from both Russia and Ukraine were higher than, for example, last year period during April, May, and even February and March. And that's only proof that despite fears on food supply disruptions, Black Sea countries remain sustainable partners and secure food supply chain. Okay, very well. Good, let's move on. The last question from me and the last point to discuss in this section is, have you observed or have you noticed any changes in importers' practice or behavior during these difficult times? And actually, I would like to show the graph of freight rates. The left chart is Baltic Dry Index movements, and it is on the many years low, historical lows. And on the right chart, you can see the freight rates for to deliver Russian wheat from Novorossiysk to Egypt by Panamax and handy vessels. And it was absolutely unbelievable to understand that to ship wheat from Russia for Egypt, for example, costs less than $10. It's absolutely amazing figures. Alekis, you are the only person who can discuss with me. What is your view on this, please?
Yeah, indeed, the freight fell down a lot, and I can say that 10 $10 to Egypt, it's a big figure. Seven to six, you can find vessels which will be happy to move the cargo, which is really incredible. Coming to the question of behavior of importers, I have not faced any major changes. So we are in the mid-season. We are in the Ramadan period. Russian wheat mainly goes to Muslim countries during that time. Let's say it's Egypt, other North African countries. They are busy with Ramadan. They were busy with the previous purchases made before the lockdown. So there are no buyers who would say, we are not buying because due to COVID, we are not eating. No, they are not buying because the local demand is not there. Because of Ramadan, the demand is less. But buyers continue to show the interest for the new crop. They continue to show the interest for August, September, July positions of the coming crop. As of the prices, I can say that present levels, which we see today for the Russian 12.5 protein new crop wheat, is more or less in line with the last year prices at the same period of time. It's roughly $195, $194. We've seen the same levels during the last season. There are for sure some difficulties in technical aspects of the contracts, like delays with documents presentation, delays with payments, because lots of people work on a distance mode from home. But there are no major changes with discharging of the vessels. There are no issues, at least I have not faced and have not heard that someone faced an issue like a default or not willingness to take the cargo because of COVID. So even though the situation is absolutely not easy and unusual and not normal, but our market, wheat market, thanks God to the fact that people need to eat no matter what, is kind of okay. And let's pray that it will continue like this.
Okay. Thank you so much, Oleg, for joining us in discussion with very vulnerable, sensitive questions. So, as you mentioned, everyone is looking for the next crop, and on this stage, on this point, I will move my presenter rights to my colleague Aaron, and he will go on.
Thank you, Svetlana. Hello to everyone here from London. I hope everyone is healthy and safe. And Svetlana and Oleg, thank you very much for that very interesting discussion and those insights. Yes, as Svetlana already said, I will give a production outlook on wheat in the Black Sea countries for this season. I will start off to show the importance of these countries, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Ukraine, for the global wheat market. Then we will have a quick look at past and upcoming weather, which will define wheat yield. And at the end, I will show our estimates for area, yield, and production. So let's get started. Here at Refinitiv, in our agricultural research group, we cover a vast variety of crops and geographies. But today we will, as mentioned before, focus on the blue countries, that is Kazakhstan, Russia, and Ukraine, and on wheat. But feel free to check out our other analysis pages on ICON. So why is it so important to look at Black Sea countries when it comes to wheat? So we have here the figures from 2019-20 from USDA. While production, they sum up around 15% of last season, which is of course significant, they're actually responsible for about 1/3 of export. So most of the wheat they produce is actually exported, and they're of great importance to global markets. Of course, and it's very important to know how much wheat will be there, actually. So wheat yield is primarily determined by, of course, techniques, but the main determinant is weather. And to kind of have a geographic idea where winter wheat and spring wheat is grown, I've made these maps, and they show the average wheat production for the past 5 years. So we see that winter wheat is primarily grown along the Black Sea. The main campus are Krasnodar, Rostov, but also in the Ukraine along the Black Sea, and to some extent moving into central Russia and the Volga districts. Spring wheat, on the other hand, is grown mostly eastwards of the Ural Mountains along the Kazakh-Russian border. So keep these maps in the back of your head, and we will now look at the weather so we can kind of see where was weather and how it affected these different varieties of crops. We will want some interaction from the audience now. So I'm asking you, how do you estimate the soil moisture in the Black Sea countries? Regions this spring, do you think it's very dry, rather dry, or not bad really? So there's been a lot of talk. I will again give you roughly, and then we will move to your answers. Okay, please finish your answers. I will now show the results. So most of you think it's rather on the dry side, but not extreme dry yet. So we will now have a look on those maps and see what is actually the point of view at the moment. Now, to, of course, look at the soil moisture level, we have to see how much precipitation there was in the months previous to now, and then we'll have a look on how much there will be. So the winter for Black Sea countries was primarily, in regards to precipitation, relatively normal, while temperatures were very high, up to 7 degrees on average above over the whole period from December to March. In general, you could say it was good for the crop which was sown in fall, because there was no real threat of frost kills. However, of course, because it was warm, the crop did not harden. So anytime there was always the risk of cold temperatures moving into the areas of sown areas, so that would result in really dramatic damages to them. Luckily, this hardly happened. We had in mid-March some lower temperatures in northern Ukraine, so there were some frost damages. But overall, the winter wheat emerged in a good to very good condition in most of Ukrainian and Russian areas. However, like I said already, precipitation has been normal, which in any given season would be fine. But unfortunately, last summer was very dry, very hot. So soil moisture level last year at the beginning in March were around 30 millimeters below normal in most of Ukraine. However, due to the very hot summer in March, the winter wheat facing dryness, we had mostly in Ukraine roughly 60 to 80 millimeter below normal. So, or the long-term average, if you would say so. So we are roughly 50 millimeters below the previous season. And while the central district in Russia seems to have really good soil moisture levels, better than last season, the south of Russia, Krasnodar and so on, are also faring severe dryness in March. So they were roughly, again, 80 millimeters below normal. That situation actually worsened, especially for the southern Russian region, because precipitation has been relatively low in the up to now. While Ukraine, on the other hand, in particular in the northern and central districts, have received which offset the soil moisture level there, and soil moisture levels should be in a good state, but still below normal. Also, central Russian district and the eastern spring wheat areas receive plenty of rainfall. So these crops have a good foundation of soil moisture level, but the winter wheat in southern and eastern Ukraine, as well as southern Russia, had to do on dryness already during the first stages of plant growth. While precipitation kicked in the last weeks, a lot of damage was already done ahead of the schedule. So Ukraine, for example, reported a couple of weeks back that roughly 150,000 hectares of winter wheat were already lost to drought, particularly. So that's something to consider. And while I see that dryness is probably the biggest concerns, we will now see in our forecast from our weather team that dryness is particular for the spring wheat more and more of an issue. Here we see the temperature anomaly slabs forecast for June to August. We see that especially in Ukraine and Eastern Europe, we will likely see a heat wave, but also the other areas in Kazakhstan and in Russia will see temperatures above the long-term averages, which in general does not mean a bad thing. It can boost plant development, but we need sufficient soil moisture level for that to have positive effects. So on the right side, we see the precipitation anomalies as forecasted by our weather team, and we see a severe lack of precipitation likely to happen in Ukraine and in central Russia, where, of course, this is in the very late stages of winter wheat rainfall. So if this severe dryness might not have too much effect on the rainfall, but spring wheat planted in these areas, it's not so much as we saw in Jefferson, but this will have very, very big effects also on other spring crops. So if we now consider all the weather impacts, so we have dryness, we have, but we had a very warm winter, so that was good for the crop. We run our models, of course, and here I present, first of all, our area estimates for these countries. And we see in general in Russia, in regards to winter wheat, an upward trend. We expect about 16.7 million hectare to be harvested. Spring wheat, we see a downward trend to 11.2 million hectares. So in general, but the area of wheat expanded. And we think, and of course it's underlined by the Russian strategy to increase grain cereal production to 150 million tons by 2035. So there's a lot of investment and a lot of influence to increase the area. Ukraine, on the other hand, as I mentioned before, is rather stable, but lost already some area due to the droughtness. But also during sowing season, prices were relatively low compared to 1 or 2 years previous. So farmers didn't have too much incentives to plant wheat. Kazakhstan, on the other hand, is stable, roughly about 11.2 million hectares of spring wheat, going slightly down because Kazakh ministry or Kazakh government wants to diversify production, so a little bit away from winter. But still, it's relatively stable to the seasons before. So in January, we see relatively stable harvested area outlooks or increasing on the Russian side. Now coming to yield, affected by weather primarily, we see that Russian winter wheat yield is below last season, primarily due that areas like Krasnodar are heavily affected by the dryness. Wheat is under problems there. If you come to spring wheat, we saw that the spring wheat areas seem to have better conditions, at least at the start. But it's, of course, going to be interesting and difficult to see how dryness will come and to which extent. Ukraine, on the other hand, has been really dry. The last summer dried out the soils. There has not been rainfall in the beginning of the plant development, but recently. So a lot of damage was already done, but the recent rainfall actually helped yields, especially now when the crop is going in grainfall, and our models have been having an upward trend. And I will talk about that when I show the production estimates a bit more. Kazakh spring wheat is recovering a bit from last season, and due to the good moisture level, we see it close to the 5-year average. Now, revealing our total production estimates. First, we want to know from you how you see the new wheat crop in Ukraine. I was talking a lot about how soil moisture levels have been very low, and what weather is going to happen soon. So again, I will give you roughly 20 seconds and a quick warning before we end it. So please. Okay. Please submit your answers now. Okay, I will now move to the results. Most of you see the Ukraine crop in last year's. That's in general, I agree with that number, that outlook. A few of you are more optimistic, but now we want to see what you think about the Russian wheat crop. And again, please submit your answers now. Okay. Please submit your answers. Okay. Now go to the results. Many of you see it's going to be better, or at least on the previous level, which was roughly 74 million tons. And now let's see how we see our yield actually on. You see the map changes. We have wheat yields to the previous 5% above, so the very green areas, or up to 25% or more below, which are the very red areas. And as we can see on the map, the big wheat producing area in Ukraine and Russia are tending towards the negative side, which is not surprising given the really low soil moisture levels and the conditions the crop are in. And spring wheat areas, on the other hand, more to the east, they are primarily colored in green. So soil moisture levels are above last year's. In the central district of Russia, wheat yield is also better because soil moisture levels are better than last year's. So we expect yields to be better in regions. Now, I'll look at our production numbers. Yes, we see, primarily due to the increase in area, we see a big uptick in winter wheat yield and winter wheat production in Russia. Spring wheat is going to be lower at 18.7 million tons. That is due to the decrease in area primarily, while spring wheat yield is going to be on the same level or slightly above. In Ukraine, which had a really good winter wheat harvest last season with 29.2 million tons, we expect a decrease by roughly 5 million tons, which is due to the dryness primarily and a slight decrease in the area. However, recently our last models see to incorporate the increase in precipitation, so we might see revised forecasts in the future which go above 25 million tons. Kazakhstan, on the other hand, again, better soil moisture level, area quite unchanged, and weather forecast outlook relatively good. So we will likely see an increase in production from the previous year. So we see 12.6 million tons, while Kazakhstan was last year at 11.5. Russia wheat crop in total, we expect momentarily at 70.7 million tons. This is if you look at the table to the right in comparison with other state and other agencies. We see many agencies agrees at 70.7 million tons, USDA is 77 million, and the others are roughly 77, 78. One is above 50. Ukraine, on the other hand, roughly around 24.5, a little bit up to 25. But USDA is at 28 million ton, which is, in my opinion, surprisingly high. But We have to see how much area was lost in the end and how much precipitation actually helped now in late grain still. Kazakhstan, we only have seen an outlook from USDA, which is not far off of ours. We're 12.6, they're 13.5. So there's still general accordance there. So yeah, that was our production outlook for winter wheat or wheat yield. And yeah, now we question answers. And yeah, maybe I start ahead and we'll start with a question from the audience, which is, so Ministry of Economy of Ukraine currently expects 2020 harvest of 65 to 68 million ton. And the question is whether we agree, why and what. So we do not forecast all the crops, but if I roughly sum up now, we would be 25 million tons of wheat, 35 million tons of corn. We will be close to the number, maybe slightly above 68 million tons. So I generally agree. And I know that the ministry has been revising their forecasts downwards, primarily due to the dryness. Yes, so I agree. But like I said, our model runs have been lately ticking upwards due to the increased precipitation, in particular to wheat. However, the drought coming up in summer, most likely, it's going to have very severe effects on corn. So there might be another 2 to 3 million tons lost. So what other questions do we have?
Actually, let me get in. The other question was, and it's rather interesting as for me, can we still expect good quality and better price in the Black Sea region in post-COVID-19 times? Actually, I may state that the quality of wheat is mostly depend on the weather. Yeah, Aaron, could you correct me? And the second side of this problem of providing a better quality is using the relevant and the proper inputs, yeah, on a due time and in necessary volumes. So I think from this point of view, in Ukraine at least, there won't be any problem because a lot of producers, smart holdings, agro holdings, use actually and do everything what they need to get as better quality for wheat as it's possible. And the most unpredictable factor in this case is weather. It can support us or it can just ruin the situation. Aaron, do you have any amendments to my answer, please?
Well, a little bit. So if we look at quality, I said already a lot of damage was done in Ukraine, particularly in southern Russia, ahead of the recent rainfall. That was mainly so we will have lower yield in general, but of course it's a question of quality, how much protein or how much content we will have in there. And the recent rainfall might actually help us that as the crop is now moving to. So we might be able, and the crop is in general in good condition when emerging out of winter. So we might actually see quite fairly good quality yield to say, but that depends, of course, how much the rainfalls were absorbed by the soil. But it doesn't look as bad as the dry stores in March or April might make someone assume.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Oleg, are you online? Are you still with us?
I'm still with you.
Yes, thank you so much. And I would like to ask this question. I would like to ask you this question. So, do you have any predictions or any ideas what kind of quality wheat will Russia get this year? Maybe you have some information from
my favorite
farmers.
question.
Uh-huh.
My favorite question.
I know.
I can assuredly tell that we will have a crop. Yes.
Yes.
What kind of quality will be? What the quantity will be? It's all in hands of Mother Nature. It doesn't depend on COVID. It doesn't depend on birds flu anyhow. So it's unpredictable. It's totally unpredictable, because if you look at previous season, when in the beginning of July there were rains and everybody was complaining that, come on, we'll have a bad crop, we'll have feed wheat, it's terrible. But reality showed that Russia harvested enormous quantity of high protein wheat. Nobody expected that. Same season, same situation we might face this season. So we don't know. Coming to the quality in general, I think that Black Sea in general and Russian wheat is already in perfect condition. It's fantastic wheat. Bug damage, which Russia shows for recent shipments, is less than 0.5%. So it easily, not easily, but it goes to Saudi Arabia, which was the dream of traders for several years. Now Russia is there. So
congrats
coming to the better prices, I don't know what is better prices. For me, better prices are yesterday and tomorrow. Today, you never know.
Yes, thank you so much. But if we speak about trends, do you expect any slowdown in wheat prices due to harvest pressure, for example? Because it's a traditional slide in prices in June, July.
You know, I have not seen any harvest pressure this season, unfortunately. Even though it was predicted by a number of analytics that harvest pressure will come, farmers will be forced to sell their wheat at very cheap levels because they don't have a place where to store it. Unfortunately, we've seen totally opposite. Farmers showed to everyone a nice smile, saying that, guys, when you will need the cargo, we are waiting from you. Here is a price tag. So harvest pressure we've seen and felt, but it was opposite. I mean, we were squeezed by the fact that we had to execute the contracts, and you could not originate the cargo at the price you were predicting. That's pressure we felt indeed, yeah, but not the harvest pressure.
Yeah. It won't be the harvest pressure. Okay, thank you so much. I won't force you to stay with us. I know you have your own business. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Aaron, I have a question to you in the chat. Could you comment on this, please?
So there were a couple of questions, of course. Maybe there was one question regarding the corn crop in Ukraine and the upcoming dryness. And yes, the drought, as it is predicted by the weather models at the moment, will have severe impact. Our last outlook of corn crop in Ukraine was roughly 35 million tons, which was 4 million tons below USDA already. And as I've been running models lately again, with even updated forecast, models tend to go even lower to 33, 34 million tons. So that's an issue we need to watch in the coming weeks to see how these models tend. Our analysts, weather analysts, are pretty certain on the several models they run that there will be dryness, but to which extent, that's going to be very important to see. And there was another question on that we see a decline in the spring egg area in Russia. and that is due to also the planting conditions to some extent. So it's not a massive decline. Our models tend to go lower on the spring wheat, but very wet soils with additional rainfall coming or having been there recently. And yes, that might make it harder for farmers to plant the crop. But of course, that's something to watch. And it's also a question of how farmers will react to the prices, which we now see. So in December, January, it depends on when the farmers made their decision to plant or when to procure seeds. Prices were not that high, but if they react now to the prices higher, they are able to have the seeds and everything, we might have to rise that number a little bit upwards.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking part in our webinar. I hope we have covered as much areas of interest from your side, and we've provided you with as possible insight as we can. Actually, it was a big pleasure to share our thoughts and our ideas with the audience, with you. Thank you so much for joining. And I think if you have any questions, you may put them in the Q&A chat, and we will answer them a little later, because actually now we are run out of time, unfortunately. Thank you so much again. Have a rest of the day and take care.